Hello everybody. I am changing my introduction because the lazy and gentleman thing is apparently not picked up as being a Finnegan's Wake reference. So somebody was offended about that. I deleted their comment, but I'm going to take it seriously as to something that I can possibly improve. This is a mid-November reading progress, and the reason why I am doing this is because it's supposed to be nonfiction November, and I'm still reading nonfiction, but it's not what I planned. So, if you guys are here, curious what I'm doing for reading, I'm Mark, and this is Several Books. Okay, so what I originally had planned for November was to read these three books which I read and three other books about corn, because I'm writing something about corn, or I'm going to be writing something about corn. I'm going to talk about these, and then I'm going to talk about the book that I'm reading instead of those three, although I will read those three, which I have here on the floor beside me, when I get the chance. The first book that we're going to be talking about is Le Mythe de l'Entrepreneur. Somebody commented that they wanted the chance to read this. I've read it now, and I can say that you're not really missing a huge amount. To my knowledge, this book is not available in English. It is largely, I don't want to use the word deconstruction because I read a lot of deconstructionists. So I read Bernard Stiegler and all these other writers you've probably heard me talk about. But essentially he's taking apart the myth of entrepreneurship around Steve Jobs. And he does talk about other companies toward the end of the book. He mentions Elon Musk and so on. But the book was probably like a 3 out of 5, or let's say like a high C, low B. It's an interesting book. It reads pretty quickly. It's not written complicated, and it's not complicatedly. It's not written in the jargon of a deconstructionist philosopher, for example. It is a work of sociology, is I guess how I would describe it. The big thing that got brought to my attention from reading this is the Chinese company Foxconn, which is a factory. And when this was written, they had assembled iPads and Apple stuff. They also assembled Xboxes, and so they're a very large company that a contractor that handles the assembly of all of these different things. Foxconn had some tragic stuff in its past. So essentially, there is question as to whether the people live up to the standards of a U.S. company, and spoiler alert, they don't, or a French company for that matter. This is a French book. So there were some things that are kind of the worst workplace occurrences that can happen. People live in it sounds like dorms of some sort. And basically, that's really what's being brought into the Apple conversation if you're from the U.S. We often hear about Steve Jobs and how intelligent he was. We don't really hear about the labor backbone lifting up Apple. You can basically find everything in here by looking at most, I want to say even just online forums that complain about tech oligarchs and tech bros and so forth. There's really nothing in here that's going to shock you if you've paid any attention to how these large companies get started, what amount of their founding myth is myth and what goes into it actually, the idea that many things are community-centered. There is a question raised in here whether we should talk about Steve Wozniak as the real genius behind Apple, and whether Steve Jobs was not just a salesman. There's also the question of whether or not the first guy who gave money to Apple, I forget the exact sum, I want to say it's like $500,000 or something, but it's probably not that much. Regardless, there was somebody who gave Apple an infusion of cash when Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were getting started that allowed them to really begin to be a company. And there is question of whether or not that guy is not the true genius behind Apple when you're not looking for the myth of the entrepreneur to build the backbone of your country. So, looking at this from a French perspective was definitely different and interesting. I have definitely read French writers who are not of the left. The French, when you're in the U.S., are, I want to even say, unfairly maligned as left-wing. I'm somebody who doesn't necessarily run from left-wing politics, but you can probably see the marks behind me somewhere. There's a number of them, and then all of the other stuff. It's not important. What I'm basically saying is that France is a developed country in Europe. And so they're going to have a very robust conservative movement there, as well as a conservative left movement. Compared to people in the U.S., we don't have a socialist party. France has a socialist party. And then they've got their liberal party. Seeing those different politics play into a cultural understanding of something like Apple is interesting. And so I wouldn't want to run from that. I want to wrap this up and just repeat, it's a 3 out of 5 book. I rate everything kind of by my own scale based on how I'm feeling at the time. A huge amount of it is just vibes. So I'm probably going to rate some Achille Mbembe works as lower than this. We'll talk about Mbembe next. Those books, in my opinion, the works of Achille Mbembe are better, but we're talking about what we're looking at. And this is basically pop sociology. It's legitimate sociology, but it's digested for a large cause, a large audience. You can get some interesting stuff if you know French and you want to read this, but honestly, unless you're determined to read the book and you've been assigned it for class or something, or you just don't spend a lot of time looking at web forums, there's nothing in here that you're not getting in a very garbled mess from people online ranting about the problems of tech oligarchs. So, Le Mythe de l'Entrepreneur, 3 out of 5. It's much, much better than books that I have sometimes compared to the online forums that birth certain kinds of thoughts. But it's not a great book. It's kind of interesting, and yeah, I'm glad I could tell you about it. But you should also be glad to see what else I talk about on this channel. And if you're interested in sociology or in European theory more broadly, let me know. I don't have a degree in sociology, but I've read a lot of classic sociology texts, and they do heavily play into contemporary literary theory. So, the next writer we're going to talk about. The next writer that we're going to talk about is Achille Mbembe. This is the book. It's called The Communauté Terrestre. I do believe that it is available in English now. If it's not, it will be soon. It's part of a trilogy. I didn't know that until I started reading the last book in the trilogy. But the other 2 books brutalism, and I struggle to pronounce this word. L'inimitié. L'inimitié? Inimitié? As somebody who ostensibly speaks some French, it's a bit of an embarrassment to struggle over the word. But when this is translated into English, it's translated as necropolitics. So necropolitics is available in English. Brutalism is available in English. And I assume communauté terrestre is. If not, it will be soon. So, what I'm going to do, rather than just review the communauté terrestre, or communauté, is talk about the trilogy. I think it will be more edifying for you, and I think it's actually better to read trilogies like this. This isn't especially long, kind of in the order they are presented to us. I'm going to start by saying Achille Mbembe is a theorist from Cameroon. He writes in English, or he writes in French, and he, I believe, got his career kind of started as a scholar of Frantz Fanon, who wrote The Wretched of the Earth, Black Skin, White Masks, The Revolution at Year 5, I think is how it's translated in English. Regardless, that's how he got started. He's very much of the moment. He knows his way around contemporary theory, and why I'm saying that is because I've seen a video of him on the YouTube where he talks with Bernard Stiegler before Stiegler left us early. And so my exposure to Mbembe, or Mbembe, I don't know how to pronounce that properly. I think it's Mbembe. Mbembe is entirely in French. I got interested in Mbembe when I found out that he had some cachet of the contemporary theorist, and also the Fanon. And the Stiegler. I love Bernard Stiegler. You've heard me mention him before. And when we get to the book of the moment, that will become more important. Necropolitics is an outgrowth of biopolitic. So Mbembe writes extensively about biopolitic. And he does this in numerous works. He uses it as a way to examine the slave trade out of Africa, as long as that happened, really. And he does reflect on the way that our bodies are used as political implements. Necropolitic is the idea that our deaths can be managed. And so, if you think of a government and an extremely large political apparatus, it's likely to manage every aspect of a person. And we can say that very neutrally. Everything that I do, for the most part, living in the United States, runs up against some kind of regulation somewhere. While it's true that I don't have any interaction with legal entities when I buy a hot dog from the convenience store, I can rest assured that that hot dog has met certain requirements so that it can be sold, so that it is healthy, so that I'm not going to keel over after eating my hot dog. However, not every government is the same way. Some don't require certain legislation, and others use their legislation to tell a person, so often not verbally, that it is their time, so to speak. And so when we're talking about how to manage death, what frequently comes into the question is who is the entity that is doing it. It's much more likely that a military is going to manage the deaths of an opposing force that may or may not be in certain area they have control over. And so we begin to see, as I say this, sort of where necropolitic lies. Controlled and systematic destruction of a people is necropolitics. It's a political action to eliminate what is perceived to be an enemy of some sort, and so on. So this is where the trilogy that Mbembe wrote started. It's a short book. My copy in French is about 200 pages. I love this publishing house. I like the feel of the little books. The amount of text on the page, if you can see that, it's about what it's fair. So 200 pages is what you should expect when you're reading this. It's a good book. I read it a few years ago. I would have liked to have had the opportunity to discuss it with somebody. I read it totally on my own. But now when I'm reading books like this totally on my own, what I'm going to be doing is making videos about them. So part 1, Politique de l'intimité. I just prefer to say the English translation, necropolitics. That's a French word that I'm struggling with. The original, I know roughly what it means. I just have trouble saying it. So yeah, it's the politics around death. The second book in this trilogy is called Brutalism. It's the longest in the trilogy, and essentially what Mbembe does is that he says that the architectural movement brutalism, the aesthetics of that, can be applied to the brutality that we see in various governments. So, there's not a huge amount else to say except for that. We get the normal biopolitics. So everything is kind of funneled through this idea of how is the body, how is a human body being handled. And for Mbembe, frequently it's very harshly. And he likes to focus on kind of the idea about when a person is a person, conceptually, and when we remove their personhood, we meaning any government or political body, and start to see what should be a person as an object. And that plays into all of Mbembe. That's broader than just these, but it does make an appearance here. Brutalism itself, in the U.S., we probably know brutalism mostly because we've got a few government buildings that are famous for being sort of ugly and big, essentially mounds of concrete with some windows in them. And that's the style of brutalism, this kind of rough concrete external part of the building. In parts of Europe, they're much more popular. They were used for housing projects and such. I think in the U.S. that's the case also, but we don't think about it as much. But Brutalism was a fairly quick read. I read Brutalism like 4 or 5 weeks ago, and I thought it was good. I don't have a lot negative to say about it. We're seeing references to Malthus, who was problems of population. I don't remember his arguments too specifically. For me, this really was about managing the body. There are some, flipping through this now, other things I can mention. Or he does rely on Lacan quite a bit. He's frequently referencing Lacan. In other books of his, he talks about Georges Bataille quite a bit. That was actually the thing that really tuned me into Mbembe, when he was talking about La Part Maudite in comparison with slavery. That's the accursed share. Essentially, the idea that whenever you prepare something such as corn, because I was talking about corn, you always have a part that's going to be sacrificed. It's your surplus. And when you sell everything, you don't really want to necessarily, if you're talking about a career, sell out of all your corn on day one. You sort of want to always be able to bring more corn in. That idea can be applied to the human body in the context of slavery. L'esclavage est très important pour Achille Mbembe. So, I would recommend this. If I'm going to say a Mbembe book that's better, Critique of Black Reason is great, and Of the Post-Colony is also better than this trilogy. Those are the other books of his that I've read. I've got Leaving the Grand Knight, or whatever it is in English. It's not as good. It's shorter essays. So, Brutalism and La Politique de l'Intimité. And our last book was the book that I just finished like 3 or 4 days ago. I guess it was probably 5 now. But La Communauté Terrestre is a book that very heavily looks at biopolitic, and it discusses the relations of humans to the earth, and it also discusses the earth as part of our natural resources, simply the land itself, and how valuable the land is. And further, he discusses that context in colonialism. He discusses that in the context of colonialism. One of the other things he talks about at great length, which is, for me, very interesting, is technology. So, my favorite theoretician is probably Bernard Stiegler at the moment. It could change, but I look at Stiegler the way that some people look at Marx, for instance. And one of Stiegler's big things was to deconstruct the space between the person and the tools they use. And what he says is essentially our tools, and therefore our technology, are really extensions of who we are as people, and they should essentially be regarded almost as the same thing as part of a person. We get questions of technology in this, and he's very clearly influenced by the thinking of writers like Stiegler, if not Stiegler himself. As I said, I have seen a video of him talking with Stiegler, and yeah, I don't have a whole lot else to say. Mbembe at present, I believe, is a college professor in Germany, but I'm not positive about that. I see a note on the book that places him in Johannesburg. So I don't know exactly what's going on for him at the moment. But let's rank the books as one book. This is like a B+. All 3 of these are not the best Mbembe, and I would recommend reading Mbembe over Le Mythe de l'Entrepreneur. It's just that when we read Mbembe, we're doing something different than reading a pop sociology book, or the book that I'm reading next that I'm going to rate highly as well. So let's put these at a 4 out of 5. Like 4 out of 5. Let's say more thumbs than I have. More than 2 thumbs. No, it should be like a thumb and a half, or maybe like an old school hitchhiker's thumb. And that's basically where we're going with Mbembe. I really do encourage reading him. He's an interesting guy. I don't think he's the best working theorist in the world right now, but he does deserve his fame and accolades, and sometimes I wish he was a little more famous than he was. So, Mbembe for Biopolitic. Now, the last book in the original set that I was going to read is called Tamed. And this is a pop science, pop history book that essentially looks at the early domestication of 10 different organisms and when they started. So it's dogs, wheat, cattle, corn, potatoes, chickens, rice, horses, apples, and humans. It seems that this all started around 9,000 years ago to 12,000 years ago. There might be one or two things that were a little later or earlier than that I'm not remembering very well. But there was like apparently some kind of revolution where this domestication sort of started happening all over the planet with various different types of animals and plants. I thought the book was great. But it is a pop science book. So I'm going to say this is a 4 out of 5, maybe a B plus or even an A if you're into pop science. But even though I rate Mbembe lower, I would probably recommend reading Mbembe before reading this. That said, this is an interesting book. The section on corn, although I didn't get a huge amount of information that will be relevant to me when I'm working on that, what it did allow me to do was daydream. And sometimes the right fuel for a daydream can be just as valuable as information. So it got me really thinking about corn, maize. And so I've had my introduction, and I thought it was an excellent introduction. Tamed. It was a solid book. Finally, we are at Why I Am Derailed. This is a book by Emmanuel Carrère. I have a video on Carrère. I've read most of his books. I saw something today that said he had published 15. I have not read 15. I've read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Looks like 10 of his books. So I know that, what else? We got Werner Herzog, a biography of him, and there's a reader, which is, they count, I think, but I'm not going to read. So I see 2 collections. Basically, I've read most of his work. I haven't read all of it. This is about his mother, and his mother was what they call an eternal, I believe. I believe she was an eternal. There is a position called an eternal at the Académie Française. The Académie Française is kind of an organizing body for managing the French language. What's very different about French than English, for instance, is that English, we don't have a managing body. The closest thing that we have to an Académie Française is just very good libraries. The Académie Française answers questions like what genre or gender of a word should there be? What changes should we make to the French language? And it's a very prestigious institution. If you go through French literary history, everyone from Baudelaire to Emmanuel Carrère has had some kind of interaction with the Académie Française at a certain point, simply by being very celebrated and famous in many cases. But it's not necessarily everybody's main thing. But his mother was a historian, and she's in this very prestigious body. And she passed away, and he's writing the story of her. This is a nonfiction book. It's called a nonfiction novel. But when we think of a nonfiction novel, we think of other Carrère. We think of a writer like Truman Capote in Cold Blood. So clearly a nonfiction novel is not quite the same as an essay. For this reason, I'm interrupting my nonfiction November. I am still reading nonfiction. Technically, I'm going to scooch under the radar as having read nonfiction November. But when it comes down to everything, I don't have a whole lot else I can say. I have started the novel. I'm very early in it. I'm 30 pages into it. He's talked about his father, his siblings, and Emmanuel Macron, who apparently was at the ceremony for his mother. That should give you some kind of understanding of the import of a person who sits on the Académie Française. They have the president of the country come to their funeral. It's a very big deal. So, starting the book, the text moves a little quickly, but I haven't gotten very far in it enough to really say anything about it. I know already I'm going to like it. If it just continues doing what it's doing and doesn't drop the baton, I will say this is a good book. It's Emmanuel Carrère. I've said he's basically one of my favorite living writers, and I'll just reiterate that. The last thing I want to say is, because I'm talking about all this French stuff, today is the 13th of November, which is a day of tragedy in France. Carrère wrote Vitrez on that. I looked into the book today. When I first talked about that on my channel, I wasn't sure it was available in English, I think, or if it was, I wasn't really totally sure on what the reception was. The reception of that book in English was booming. Times, the New York Times, and I think the New Yorker all said that it was like the best, but one of the best 10 books of the year. So if you get the chance, check out Vitrez. It's worth reading. It's definitely interesting. I avoid trying to pass any kind of quality judgment on the book simply because it is the book of today. So I'm probably going to edit and post this video either today or tomorrow. But if I'm talking about all this stuff in French, and especially Carrère, I do want to make a note that today is a day of tragedy in the history of France. And although I am an American, and although this might be a bit light, I would like to say something, as I've said, mostly in honor of tragedy. Okay, the last thing that I'm going to do is say that what I was going to make before I decided to make the in the middle of November video was a review of 10 authors of short fiction. Many people don't read a lot of short fiction. I went through a long several-year period where short fiction was the majority of what I read. So I've read basically all of Chekhov. I've read like 230 stories or 220 stories. The entire that Constance Garnett translation. But one of the books that I'm going to recommend, as you can see, is basically the size of a phone book. I'm not going to tell you what that book is until we do the short fiction review. Part of me worries that not a lot of people will be interested in short fiction, but I honestly don't know. And that's it. I'm going to be reading Carrère and some French. I made a deal with myself that I would start on the 2 books of the Seven Dreams series that I own by William T. Vollmann beginning next month. So I will be doing more Vollmann. I might be trying to make a video of him. I'm not sure yet. I've got a stack of him, and I kind of plan on just doing it all in one go. We'll see about that when we get started. I've been able to do that with authors before, but there have been many more times I've failed to finish a big stack and gotten sidetracked in another thing than times I've succeeded. I think the longest single book if you're talking novel length run that I've made, was I read 11 books by Mario Vargas Llosa, essentially one after the other. I couldn't get enough of him when I discovered him. All right, guys, that's it. Thanks for everything. Several books out.